January 10th, 2026. The White House press secretary stood at the podium and delivered a statement that will fundamentally alter global commodity markets for decades to come. The president and his team are discussing a range of options to pursue Greenland, Caroline Leavitt announced, before adding the words that sent tremors through every silver trading desk on the planet, utilizing the U.S. Military is always an option at the commander-in-chief's disposal. Within hours, silver futures spiked 6% in aftermarket trading. This was not speculative hysteria. This was the market's cold mathematical response to what industry insiders are calling the supply earthquake. The moment when America's acquisition of Greenland could remove over 15 million ounces of silver from global circulation and trigger the most severe supply crisis in precious metals history. We are witnessing the opening moves of a resource war that will reshape not just silver prices, but the entire architecture of critical mineral supply chains. And the numbers behind this crisis are more terrifying than anyone has publicly acknowledged. The official narrative focuses on Arctic security and missile defense systems. Trump's advisors speak of Russian submarines and Chinese shipping routes. These concerns are legitimate and well documented. But there is a deeper dimension to this crisis that geological surveys and mining industry reports have been quietly tracking for years. Greenland contains what the U.S. Geological Survey estimates to be some of the world's largest untapped silver deposits. The Kvanefjeld complex in southern Greenland alone holds an estimated 15.2 million ounces of silver reserves, concentrated in high-grade ore formations that rival the productivity of Mexico's primary silver mines. The Tanbreeze project, currently controlled by Critical Metals Corp with significant Chinese investment, sits atop additional silver deposits estimated at 3.8 million ounces. The Amitsoq graphite project, recently designated as a strategic project by the European Union, contains silver-bearing ore as a secondary resource with preliminary estimates suggesting 2.1 million ounces of recoverable silver. Combined, Greenland's confirmed and probable silver reserves total over 21 million ounces. This represents roughly 2.5% of global annual silver consumption, concentrated in a single geographic region that America is now moving to control through military force if necessary. But this is where the mathematics become catastrophic for the global silver market. Current global silver production stands at approximately 830 million ounces annually from all sources: primary mines, secondary recovery, and recycling operations. Global consumption, driven by industrial applications, investment demand, and jewelry production, consumes roughly 1.2 billion ounces per year. This creates a structural deficit of 370 million ounces annually that has been growing progressively worse since 2021. The deficit has been filled primarily through drawdowns of above-ground stockpiles, recycling programs, and strategic reserve releases by various governments. American control of Greenland would not simply remove 21 million ounces from global supply chains. It would remove them from the available supply that currently helps bridge the annual deficit. More critically, it would signal to industrial users worldwide that strategic mineral resources are no longer governed by free market principles, but by geopolitical control. This realization is already driving panic buying behavior among major industrial consumers. Tesla's procurement department has quietly increased silver inventory positions by over 200% since Trump's Greenland statements began. Internal Tesla documents, obtained through supply chain sources, reveal the company is stockpiling silver for 18 months of production rather than their normal 3-month inventory cycle. Apple has initiated emergency sourcing protocols, reaching out to secondary silver suppliers across South America and Asia to secure alternative supply chains independent of North American sources. The company has reportedly signed forward purchase agreements for over 2 million ounces of silver at prices up to $95 per ounce for delivery through 2027. But the most significant panic buying is occurring in the solar industry, where silver consumption has exploded due to the global renewable energy transition. China's solar panel manufacturers, who control over 80% of global photovoltaic production, consume approximately 140 million ounces of silver annually. Chinese industrial sources report that major solar companies are now purchasing silver at any price below 100 per ounce, treating it as strategic inventory rather than production input. BYD, China's largest electric vehicle manufacturer, has established a dedicated silver procurement division and is reportedly building strategic stockpiles of over 5 million ounces to secure battery and electrical component production through 2030. This industrial hoarding creates a feedback loop that accelerates the supply crisis. As companies stockpile silver to protect against future shortages, they create immediate shortages that drive other companies to stockpile even more aggressively. The situation is exacerbated by the geographic concentration of current silver production. Mexico produces approximately 190 million ounces annually, representing roughly 23% of global output. Peru contributes another 110 million ounces. China produces about 85 million ounces annually, If America controls Greenland's silver resources and restricts their availability to allied nations only, countries like China lose access not only to Greenland's deposits, but potentially to North American silver markets entirely. This would force them to bid aggressively for South American and Asian silver, driving up global prices across all regional markets. The Chinese response to potential silver supply restrictions is already evident in commodity futures markets. Chinese state-owned enterprises have been accumulating long positions in London and Shanghai silver futures, building positions that industry analysts estimate exceed 50 million ounces of paper silver exposure. This represents a strategic hedge against physical supply disruptions, but it also creates massive potential for price manipulation. If Chinese entities decide to take physical delivery of their futures positions simultaneously, they could drain London and New York silver inventories within weeks. The London Bullion Market Association reported that registered silver stocks in approved London vaults have declined by 35% since December 2025, falling to just over 280 million ounces. The COMEX silver inventories in New York have dropped even more dramatically, with registered stocks below 45 million ounces, the lowest level since 2016. These inventory drawdowns are occurring before any actual disruption to Greenland silver supplies. The market is pricing in scarcity based solely on the potential for American control, not the reality of supply restrictions. This creates a mathematical trap for global silver consumers that has no easy resolution. If they wait for diplomatic clarification on Greenland's status, they risk facing much higher prices once American control is established and silver becomes a strategic resource rather than a traded commodity. If they stockpile now, they accelerate the very price increases and supply shortages they seek to avoid. Industrial users are caught in this impossible position, but defense contractors face an even more complex calculation. The Pentagon's National Defense Stockpile maintains strategic reserves of various critical materials, but silver stockpiles have been historically inadequate for extended conflict scenarios. A single Virginia-class submarine requires approximately 2,000 ounces of silver for electrical systems, wiring, and electronic components. Aegis destroyers use roughly 1,200 ounces per vessel. Defense Logistics Agency assessments indicate potential shortfalls exceeding 50 million ounces of silver in scenarios involving sustained military production. Greenland's silver deposits could theoretically address these shortfalls while providing long-term supply security independent of foreign sources. This military dimension explains why silver has maintained elevated prices despite apparent global economic uncertainty. Defense contractors are quietly building silver inventories in anticipation of potential supply restrictions, creating additional demand pressure on already constrained markets. Raytheon has reportedly increased silver procurement by 400% since November 2025, building strategic reserves for missile guidance systems and radar components. Lockheed Martin has established forward purchase agreements extending through 2029, securing silver supplies for F-35 production and satellite systems. The defense industry's silver hoarding creates spillover effects into civilian markets, as military contractors compete with technology companies for limited supplies. This cross-sector competition drives prices higher across all applications, from solar panels to smartphones to automotive electronics. But the most dangerous aspect of the current supply crisis is the breakdown of traditional price discovery mechanisms. Silver has traditionally traded as a global commodity with prices set by supply and demand fundamentals across international markets. The London Fix, COMEX Futures, and Shanghai Futures Exchange have provided pricing benchmarks based on available supply and anticipated demand. American control of Greenland fundamentally breaks this price discovery system. If the United States restricts Greenland silver to domestic and allied consumption only, global markets no longer reflect true supply availability. Prices in different regions could diverge dramatically based on political access rather than economic fundamentals. We are already seeing early signs of this market fragmentation. Silver premiums in Shanghai have spiked to over $8 per ounce above London spot prices, reflecting Chinese concerns about future supply access. European silver dealers report premiums exceeding $12 per ounce for immediate delivery, as industrial users pay whatever necessary to secure physical inventory. This premium explosion indicates that paper silver markets are becoming disconnected from physical reality. Futures contracts may trade at one price while actual silver changes hands at significantly higher levels, creating arbitrage opportunities that drain physical inventories even faster. The mathematical progression of this supply crisis points toward price levels that seemed impossible just months ago. If current industrial hoarding continues at present rates, above-ground silver inventories could be depleted within 18 months, regardless of mining production increases. Major silver mines require 3 to 5 years to expand production capacity significantly, making supply responses too slow to address immediate shortages. At current consumption rates, removing Greenland's 21 million ounces from global markets creates an additional supply gap equivalent to roughly 8 days of worldwide silver usage. This may seem minimal, but in markets already running 370 million ounce annual deficits, every additional constraint compounds exponentially. Industry analysts are quietly circulating supply models that project silver prices reaching $150 per ounce by late 2026 if current hoarding behavior continues. More aggressive scenarios, incorporating full-scale industrial stockpiling and geopolitical restrictions, suggest prices could reach $200 per ounce within 2 years. These projections assume normal economic conditions and typical industrial demand patterns. They do not account for additional factors that could accelerate the supply crisis further. A broader U.S.-China trade war could trigger strategic silver stockpiling by both nations, removing hundreds of millions of ounces from commercial markets. Military tensions in Taiwan or the South China Sea could drive defense-related silver demand even higher. Financial system instability could create investment demand for physical silver as a monetary alternative. Any of these scenarios could push silver prices beyond $200 per ounce into territory that would fundamentally restructure entire industries. Solar panel production becomes economically marginal at silver prices above $180 per ounce using current photovoltaic technologies. Electric vehicle manufacturers would be forced to redesign electrical systems to minimize silver content, creating supply chain disruptions and production delays. Electronics manufacturers would face impossible choices between absorbing massive material cost increases or passing them through to consumers in the form of dramatically higher prices for smartphones, computers, and appliances. The ripple effects extend beyond industries directly consuming silver. Banks holding short positions in silver futures face potential catastrophic losses if prices spike to $200 levels. Insurance companies with commodity exposure, pension funds with mining equity holdings, and sovereign wealth funds with precious metals allocations would all require fundamental risk model recalibrations. But perhaps most significantly, the Greenland silver crisis represents the end of globalized commodity markets as they have operated for the past 50 years. The assumption that strategic resources would remain available through free market mechanisms is being challenged by renewed great power competition. Silver is merely the first commodity where this new reality is becoming apparent, but the precedent has implications across the entire spectrum of critical materials. If America can justify control over Greenland's mineral resources based on national security concerns, other powers will inevitably pursue similar strategies. China could restrict rare earth exports more aggressively. Russia could weaponize titanium and palladium supplies. Brazil could limit lithium access to favored partners. The result would be a fragmented global economy where resource access is determined by political relationships rather than economic efficiency, driving prices higher across all critical materials and creating permanent supply insecurity for nations lacking domestic alternatives. The silver market has become a laboratory for this new era of resource nationalism, and the early results are disturbing. Prices have already doubled from levels that seemed high just months ago, and we are still in the early stages of what could become a decade-long supply crisis. The mathematics are unforgiving. Global silver deficits are structural and growing. Industrial demand continues accelerating as renewable energy transitions require ever-increasing quantities of the metal. Above-ground inventories are declining rapidly as users hoard against future shortages. American control of Greenland would inject additional supply constraints into an already tight market while signaling to industrial consumers worldwide that silver access can no longer be taken for granted. The resulting panic buying and strategic stockpiling could drive prices to levels that seemed impossible just months ago. The supply earthquake has begun, but the full magnitude requires examining specific industries that will be transformed by the coming price explosion. Consider the solar industry, which consumes approximately 140 million ounces of silver annually in photovoltaic production. At current silver prices around $75 per ounce, silver represents roughly 8% of total solar panel manufacturing costs. Solar energy remains competitive with fossil fuels at these input costs. At $150 per ounce, silver would represent 16% of solar panel costs, making projects economically marginal. At $200 per ounce, silver costs would consume over 20% of manufacturing expenses, effectively killing solar energy viability in most markets worldwide. This creates a devastating feedback loop. The renewable transition drives industrial silver demand higher, but higher prices kill the economic rationale for renewable adoption. The result is either collapse in green energy deployment or desperate searches for alternatives. Some manufacturers are researching copper-based photovoltaic cells, but these deliver roughly 15% lower energy conversion efficiency. Electric vehicle manufacturers face similar trade-offs as silver prices explode. A typical electric vehicle contains 50 to 80 ounces of silver in electrical components, wiring, and battery systems. At $200 per ounce, the same vehicle would contain $10,000, $16,000 worth of silver alone. This would add massive cost pressures to EV production precisely when governments mandate transitions from internal combustion engines. Tesla has begun engineering silver out of certain systems, but complete elimination is impossible without sacrificing performance. The company's internal projections suggest 200 silver would add approximately $12,000 to Model 3 manufacturing costs, making mass-market electric vehicles economically impossible. Electronics face even more severe disruptions as silver approaches $200 levels. Smartphones contain approximately 0.35 ounces of silver in circuits, contacts, and components. At current prices, this represents about $26 in material costs per device. At $200 silver, the same smartphone would contain 70 worth of silver alone, manageable for premium devices, but devastating for budget electronics competing on thin margins. Supply shortages could halt production entirely as manufacturers compete for limited availability. Apple has reportedly redesigned iPhone components to reduce silver content by 30%, but complete elimination is impossible without sacrificing conductivity and reliability. The company faces impossible choices between absorbing massive cost increases or passing them through as dramatically higher prices. But the most dangerous aspect is impact on military applications, where price sensitivity is secondary to performance requirements. Advanced military systems are extraordinarily silver-intensive due to performance demands. Civilian applications cannot match. Military electrical systems require silver's superior conductivity, corrosion resistance, and electromagnetic compatibility regardless of cost. The F-35 fighter contains approximately 2,500 ounces of silver in avionics, radar, wiring, and electronic warfare components. At current prices, this represents roughly $8,500 in material costs per aircraft. At $200 per ounce, the same F-35 would contain $500,000 worth of silver, alone massive but manageable within the $80 million unit cost. However, supply availability becomes more critical than price for military applications. If global shortages prevent defense contractors from accessing adequate supplies, military production timelines could be severely disrupted. The Pentagon's National Defense Stockpile contains strategic reserves, but current stockpiles are inadequate for sustained conflict requirements. Defense Logistics Agency assessments indicate major Pacific conflict would consume over 200 million ounces for military production, maintenance, and replacement over 4 years. Current stockpiles contain less than 40 million ounces, creating massive strategic vulnerability. This explains why American control of Greenland's silver has become national security imperative rather than economic opportunity. The United States cannot risk dependence on foreign sources when great power competition may restrict access during conflicts. But American hoarding creates reciprocal security threats for other powers, particularly China, whose military modernization programs are equally dependent on silver-intensive technologies. Chinese defense contractors consume approximately 80 million ounces annually for military aircraft, naval systems, missiles, and electronic warfare. If American control restricts Chinese access to North American supplies, China would be forced to secure alternatives at much higher prices. This drives strategic stockpiling across industries and nations. Every major consumer recognizes silver is transitioning from traded commodity to strategic resource. Samsung has established procurement targets exceeding normal consumption by 300%, building strategic reserves for electronics production through 2028. The company treats silver like strategic metal rather than industrial input, creating additional demand pressure. European automotive manufacturers are collectively stockpiling through industry consortiums, sharing costs while ensuring access for electric vehicle production. These cooperative agreements represent additional demand that wouldn't exist under normal conditions. The cumulative effect of industrial hoarding, military stockpiling, and investment demand creates a supply shortage transcending normal commodity cycles. We are witnessing permanent scarcity in critical industrial metal, with prices reflecting this reality for decades. Mathematical models suggest current hoarding alone could consume available inventories within 24 months, regardless of mining increases. Major mines require 5 to 7 years to expand production significantly, making supply responses inadequate for immediate shortages. If Greenland's 21 million ounces are removed through American control, the constraint adds 8 additional days of worldwide consumption to existing shortages. In markets running massive annual deficits, every additional constraint compounds exponentially. The progression toward $200 silver becomes mathematically inevitable. Industrial hoarding depletes inventories faster than mining can replenish. Geopolitical controls remove additional supplies. Investment demand accelerates as users recognize strategic resource transition. More aggressive scenarios incorporating full resource nationalism suggest prices could exceed $250 per ounce if multiple powers restrict critical mineral exports to strategic partners only. Such prices would fundamentally restructure industries and force technological innovations current models cannot anticipate. The silver market has become testing ground for resource-based geopolitical competition, where control over critical materials determines industrial capacity, military capability, and economic sovereignty. Early results suggest free market commodity pricing is ending, replaced by strategic allocation based on political relationships rather than economic efficiency. The question is no longer whether silver will reach $200 per ounce, but how quickly markets will adapt to permanent scarcity conditions and what industries will survive the transition to a world where strategic metals are controlled by geopolitical power rather than supply and demand fundamentals. The reshaping of global commodity markets starts with Greenland. It ends with complete restructuring of how critical resources are priced, allocated, and secured in an era where economic warfare has replaced economic cooperation. The supply earthquake has begun. Welcome to the new reality.